deal with the project finance as some kind of economic phenomenon in the world today, which is going to be our subject for today. Especially today is our first lecture on this subject, and I'm going to explain some of the things that are basic and fundamental to the idea of project finance. In today's global economy, again, I have to always speak about global economy and globalization, because without these things our subject would be absolutely senseless to speak about. So all subjects you study at the Faculty of International Economic Relations or World Finance are senseless. They have no sense without globalization. If deglobalization really happens, then there will be no sense in studying subjects such as world economy, world finance, and many other things connected with these great phenomena. The most recent trends happening in the world of finance and project finance deals are mostly connected with Chinese initiative, One Belt, One Road initiative, this new Silk Road. This is one of the latest actually ever created phenomena about countries going global with their investments and their investment opportunities, their companies, in creating a closer world, in creating closer connections. And in order to make all those projects happen, which is really a very difficult thing to do, countries such as China would have to create a number of companies and involve millions of people doing this particular investment project. So what is it actually that Chinese companies are going to do in this project finance deal, which we call today One Belt, One Road initiative? As is well known, China, of course, is very restricted in its activities in advanced countries. It is very difficult to go to an advanced country such as the United States, build a factory there, and list your shares on the New York Stock Exchange and trade your shares freely and exchange freely with other companies, try to find some investments and to attract some lenders, sponsors, in order to finance your activities. It's going to be very difficult. The United States and the European Union have adopted in the past couple of decades a number of legislation bodies that are responsible and authorized to ban investments from China. So advanced countries of this world, in particular the United States, the European Union, Japan, and the other developed countries such as New Zealand, Australia, of course Canada, mainly countries included in OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, a club of mostly rich countries. They started their harsh response to Chinese investments, Chinese mergers and acquisitions in 2007 mostly, right before world financial crisis of 2008-2010. It was some kind of a blow to Chinese economy also, but they still found some ways to go through these bureaucratic procedures, which involved making investments in the United States, the European Union and other rich countries. I think the world financial crisis of 2008-2010 helped a lot, because many companies in the United States, in the EU, were on the brink of collapse. They almost went bankrupt. After the collapse of Lehman Brothers on September the 15th, 2008, there was a series of bankruptcies in the US, and the United States government, the government of the Barack Obama administration, wanted to create some fiscal stimulus, and they created this fiscal stimulus, running up to more than $2 trillion US. They injected these fiscal packages into the economy, and it helped a lot to ease the pressure on the economy. Also, other companies' investments were allowed to be made in this country. So there were some maybe more liberal approaches in dealing with investments from countries such as China, India. Basically, they prohibited only those investments that in some way had Chinese government behind them. It is also very known that mostly the majority of Chinese companies are state-owned enterprises or government-controlled enterprises. And in the rich world, in the Western world, people think, the governments think, that if you are a government-controlled enterprise, or if you've got some large share that belongs to your government, that means you are a spy in our economy, and that means you threaten the security of our country, you threaten privacy, you may steal some sort of high technology from our country and use it against us, and in order to prosper yourself and be world power yourself. So they started thinking about these investments, and they started being more excruciatingly sensitive about Chinese investments, and they started to scrutinize those investments using very harsh methods and approaches, all the way to CIA agency that was going to say a final word that your investment either will be allowed or banned from our country. So the CIA also had a part of it, and this whole process went on very long. For some investments, you had to wait for 90 days in order to make those investments. And 90 days for large investments is a very large, very great period of time, because during that time assets may devalue or appreciate in the value, depreciate. So it's a very that will be a very, very harmful effect for investments if they are delayed. And besides, investments such as these involves not just millions and hundreds of millions of dollars, but they involve tens of billions of dollars sometimes, and that means a company, a Chinese company, has to somehow accumulate this huge amount of money and keep it for 90 days somewhere as a fresh capital. That means they will have to deposit it somewhere, and deposits usually these days bring nothing. That means this sort of money, this capital, is going to be just a burden on your balance sheet, non-performing assets, so to speak, that will bring no profit, no return on capital for your company. And you either will go to another country and make investments there, or go back to your own country and do something else. Sometimes that was the case. In particular, in the most advanced countries of the world, it was very difficult. But big mergers, big acquisitions still happened. Also, since this became a very difficult issue to make investments in the United States, in the EU, China started thinking about making investments in other countries where it was easier, so that they could create some sort of a basis and a foundation for global expansion in the future. And they started providing capital to very poor countries, emerging economies, in Africa, in South and East Asia, in the Middle East, in Latin America, actually all across the globe. Some 130 countries are now, according to official statistics of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, are under direct support from the Chinese investments. Some of these investments are closely linked with One Belt, One Road initiative. And this One Road, One Belt initiative was first thought of as an idea of President Xi Jinping in 2012, when he just became the president of China and the highest ranking official in the Communist Party of China, Chinese Communist Party. He said that we needed to create something that would lead our country to a global world and to global supremacy. This plan came as a shock to some countries and renewed the fears on parts of the United States and the EU countries and other countries included in the OECD. They thought that this going to be some sort of Chinese invasion. Well, there were many political speculations about this One Belt, One Road initiative. Again, in terms of social security, in terms of border security, cross-border activities also. That was going to be a difficult time for China to push and try to offer new opportunities for countries somewhere in Africa or close to its borders in East Asia, Southeast Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean. Many countries really got those investment projects and investment opportunities. For instance, Ethiopia. The Ethiopian people who still today live under some sort of an emperor. He calls himself an emperor and he has a throne there, so to speak, in this country. This is a very poor country, but this is an empire, if they've got an emperor, that is. 60 years ago, they wanted to start building a river dam in order to create later on hydroelectric power station, because many countries in the world, this is a very serious issue. We're not used to this issue and problem in Russia because it rarely happens. I mean, outages, these blackouts and brownouts are not regular in Russia. In the rest of the world, outside there, in Asia, in Africa, this is a very ordinary thing. For example, in India, outages, blackouts and brownouts happen sometimes twice or even 3 times a day, or even more. And that means factories do not work. That means if you want still to continue working, that means you will have to use some sort of diesel equipment which pollutes environment and emits too much CO2, too much pollution in terms of CO2 emissions and environmental damage, and in other countries as well. So Ethiopia was also facing this problem for most of its colonial period, and after its independence they also had this problem. Without electricity, economy does not work, industry does not work, computers do not work, equipment doesn't work, so nothing works actually in the end. And 60 years ago they decided to build a hydroelectric power station. In order to do that, government decided to issue government bonds and distribute it among the population. People bought these bonds. I think they had no other option but to buy. It's just like in the Soviet Union, where people were obliged and were forced to buy government bonds, and in the end they received nothing. The same happened, the same practice happened in Ethiopia. So many bonds were issued, running into billions of dollars, and people were still buying those bonds, and they were expecting that someday, they were dreaming about it, that someday there will be this hydroelectric power station and they will have no problems with electricity. And for 60 years these people kept patient about this long process, but due to corruption, due to corrupt activities on part of the government, bribes, and mismanagement of government finances, because they used, I think, those finances on other things. They spent this money on war and their own palaces, their yachts, their assets and deposits in Switzerland or other countries. They bought luxury cars, luxury villas. So an emperor had very ambitious goals. Everything changed when China came into this country, and China was actually behind this great project, and they built this river dam on the Nile anew, so to speak. They created everything anew, and now, just a couple of months ago, this dam was completely finished. And we just wait for some sort of permission on part of other governments on the Nile. That would be an opening of it. That would be a putting of it into operation. Mostly Egypt opposes these project, because if they do this, if they put this power plant into operation, Egypt may face a water shortage supply. That means Africa actually is a continent with regular water shortages, and they're very afraid of it in Egypt, and that's why maybe there will be some very difficult negotiations about that. Also, we've got COVID-19, which also sort of delayed this happy moment for the Ethiopian people. But still, I think this plant will be put into operation very in the nearest future, because if China does something, if they want to do something, they will do it, and nothing will go in the opposite direction. So this is going to be a great opportunity for this country, but it does not go without a price, of course. China is not going to do anything for nothing, for free. This is that would be meaning a free rider problem. China, of course, takes some sort of guarantees from the Ethiopian government that would in the end help it repay those loans and investments that China put in Ethiopia. So it does mean that they just invested these $10 billion for nothing. That means they will have they received some sort of collateral. Collateral actually is a sort of a foundation of the project finance deals, because it's a guarantee that if you invested in our country, you will get back your profit and your investment with interest. And if we do not do this, we the government, we will have to pay you that collateral, and that collateral means we will have to sell you this plant which we built, and for a couple of years, maybe 5 years, 10 years, we will receive a special permission to collect electricity bills. That means Ethiopian government will be giving the Chinese an opportunity to collect a sort of a internal national tax on electricity. Or maybe they will share these profits in order for that country to operate, because for an African country going without money is just impossible to think. People will have to be paid and jobs will have to be kept. That means I think Chinese government is not going to kill this investment opportunity. What they also may do is take away some sort of resources, natural resources from this country. This is also a sort of a collateral, the foundation or the business investment foundation of the deal. That will be a guarantee for companies in China, for development banks in China to operate in the future. So it also is not going to be for free or for nothing. There's going to be very interesting opportunities also. Chinese government spent billions of dollars on projects such as these, not only Ethiopia. Ethiopia is just one small example. They did such projects included in this One Belt, One Road initiative in dozens of them. in dozens of countries, and they put into these project finance deals billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars, and even sometimes hundreds of billions of dollars. Nobody in the world knew the exact amount of money being invested until very recently, until COVID-19. World Bank economists and the IMF economists speculated on the amount of money invested by China in other countries, because this is a very serious question for them. Why is it so serious? It is serious because if Chinese investments exceeded investments and loans of the international organizations such as IMF and World Bank, that means why in the world do they have to exist then? What is the purpose in the IMF's loans and World Bank loans to the same countries if China does it at very low interest rates, on very favorable conditions, very flexible repayment schedules, and other sorts of benefits, and very easy access to more money, to more investments and more loans from China. So that was a very, very serious issue. And very great economists, sometimes even Nobel laureates in economics, developed economic models trying to estimate the amount of investments made by China in the countries such as Ethiopia or Zimbabwe, Botswana, Nigeria, Bangladesh, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Venezuela, because sometimes these countries are very close to the outside world. They're very distrustful to Western civilizations. They're very afraid of invasions and involvement. They fear sometimes that this is going to be a new colonialization period, and they just freed themselves from colonial powers just some 60 years ago, 6 decades ago, 7 decades ago. So they're very, very afraid of that. But on June the 29th, China agreed to release this data, and the reason for it, the cause of it, was COVID-19. COVID-19 helped the economists decide this very serious problem. Why was it so problematic? Why was this problem so urgent to solve? Why it demanded so much activity and solution? It is well known today still that in order to recover, the economies in the world had to produce some sort of fiscal packages in order to help their economies go from these lockdowns, these coronavirus lockdowns, and other very harsh economic conditions they live today. And it is also well known that some of the countries' GDPs went down dramatically, and that was a part of the reason for IMF's and the World Bank's forecasts about very difficult economic conditions, government debt increases in emerging countries in particular, and also in the advanced countries. And they wanted to create a sort of a database that would help to understand the real amount of debt in these countries, and maybe some of this debt will be relieved. So that means they will just write it off in order to help the poorest and least developed countries of this world to stay afloat. Because if they've got no more money to deal with the economic crisis, some social unrest may happen, maybe even revolutions will be on the rise in the emerging countries, and that will be very damaging for global cooperation. It will be a very difficult to recreate that sort of negotiation processes, and that will also be a destabilizing factor for other countries, for other financial opportunities and investments. It will be very difficult to make investments in other countries as well. So they wanted to create this database at the IMF and World Bank, and they asked the donor countries, and we know these donor countries, usually these are the most advanced countries in the world: the US, the EU, Japan, China, of course, some other important countries, maybe Australia, Canada, G7 countries, or the greatest countries, the most advanced countries included in the OECD, like I said. And they agreed, and in particular China agreed to release its data, and now we know exactly up to $1 value, even sometimes up to a cent, the amount of investments China committed in the poorest countries of the world. And these investments amounted to $106 billion, if I'm not mistaken, to the least developed countries alone. And World Bank plus IMF's loans to the same countries amounted to the almost same sum. That means the international organizations' assistance, financial assistance, humanitarian help, and other sorts of loans and investments in the poorest countries of this world combined is the same amount of loans and investments committed just by one country, and this country is China. And these investment opportunities and investment projects are included in this One Belt, One Road initiative, and now we know exactly what is the scope and the total mass, the total volume of investments being done. Also, what we know, I was very greatly surprised about that. This is a very, very great tool for researchers, for analysts to do. I was very pleased by the fact that they provided not only these numbers in total values, they also provided the data on each specific country, and they also created and uploaded spreadsheet papers in Excel format, so that you could download them too and make your own calculations. And also, what they did, you may choose a year, for example 2025, 2027, and see the amount of money and the amount of interest they will have to pay back on those investments. And you may choose any year, actually, 2030, 2031, and that means for me as a researcher, this is a very great opportunity to build and construct some sort of economic model in terms of developing a better picture of global investment flows and movements in the years to come. I do not have to do this very ridiculous, very slow process of making predictions using some sort of econometric data, which is sometimes very irrelevant, because mathematics actually is a very great science, but this science is about figures, numbers. It's not about human life, because human life is always dependent on on various factors. And you've got this real data which you just may take and use in your models and recreate those models without any very difficult econometric approaches developed. So I was very, very pleased by this very great opportunity to start a new research, because I always dreamed of something of the sort. And not only me, many people, many economists in the world were very eager to find figures such as these. And now they are freely available on World Bank website. You just go there. They made a very picturesque presentation of it. It's absolutely fantastic just looking at this presentation. So if you've got any opportunity and time, especially some spare time, to see and understand what is actually an economic data representation, or how to demonstrate your own economic results and outcomes of your own research, you may go and look at it, how it's done. It's absolutely fantastic, and it's wonderful that these economists behind this global project were so quick to do this. And they did it very, very quickly, because this is urgent times we live in, and we really need to understand the amount of debt these countries have, because debt in the end is very, very serious issue for the least developed countries. Debt is not a problem for countries such as the US, the EU, Japan. Japan went so far as to declare actually that there is no upper limit in making debts. It may also sound as a surprise to some people, but when the EU was just being created at the start of it, the European Monetary Union especially, the Maastricht Treaty said very specifically that in order to enter the European Monetary Union, in order to adopt a single currency, the euro, you had to have 60% debt to government debt to GDP ratio, 3% government deficit to GDP ratio, and some other criteria. No country in the EU today observes those rules. Even Germany is running an 87% government debt to GDP ratio. They managed to decrease it, to reduce it in 2015, 16, 17, 18, but now due to coronavirus they had to produce fiscal packages running into billions of euros, and now they again went away from these harsh brackets. Japan went farther away. Actually, their government debt to GDP ratio amounts today to 300%. This is absolutely a historic record. No country ever in the world ran such huge debts. The United States debt to GDP ratio is 100%. And just imagine this 300% debt to GDP ratio in Japan. Japan's GDP is, well, close to $5 trillion. That means they will have to repay 3 GDPs three GDPs of theirs to the rest of the world, right? And to themselves also, to the public, because the public also buys government bonds, like the people in Ethiopia or in Russia. They also keep government bonds. This 15 trillion US dollars, that is the government debt of Japan. And 100% of debt to GDP ratio in the US is 20 trillion US dollars, because US GDP is 20 trillion dollars, right? So that means Japan actually today takes the second place in the world in absolute terms. Next comes, I think, China, because China is also a heavily indebted country. This is also maybe come as a surprise to some people, but they owe their debt to GDP ratio is 240%. So this is not very small, not a very small number. 40%. Very, very, very big. And China's GDP is 12 trillion US dollars, I believe. 12. It's the second largest economy in the world today. Some economists speculate that it is already the first economy in the world by the amount of GDP, especially in PPP terms, purchasing power parity terms. They say that China, this year in particular, when other countries suffered great losses and GDP contracted in the US, in the EU, but China's GDP actually grew by 3.5% in the second quarter, and this was also a very great surprise for the international organizations, for the IMF, for the World Bank. They were really surprised. Indian GDP fell by 24%. That's absolutely a historic record in the recent decades. The financial crisis of 2008 was just an angelic view about the future. When countries lost maybe 1% of GDP or 5% of GDP. Russia lost 10% of GDP in 2008 due to world economic crisis. Today, maybe this is not going to be a 10%, but still, in terms of devaluation, ruble devaluation, I think we lost huge amounts of money in terms of deposits, in terms of life savings, and the standard of living, because the standard of living is measured in dollar terms. We got to buy lots of goods from abroad. We buy lots of electronics abroad. We do not produce iPhones and iPads and computers, MacBooks. We do not produce good cars. So we import many things from abroad. We very dependent on imports, and that means we will have to pay in hard currency. Nobody is going to take rubles in exchange for those products, and that means we will have to pay more and more. Today, the euro to ruble exchange rate exceeded a historic record again of 2016. Yeah, $90 90 rubles a euro, more than 90 euros a ruble. This is of course connected to another story of today's these not only economic sanctions but the speculations about introducing new economic sanctions, especially these Nordstream 2 project. And this is our One Road, One Belt initiative, because we also in Russia were dreaming for the past 15 years or even 20 years about independence in terms of gas supplies and oil supplies to the rest of the world, because we've got pipelines that connect Europe and Russia, these Druzhba pipeline and other gas pipelines that are really important. When they create some sort of a project such as these, when they want to build a new gas pipeline connecting countries internationally, they will have to create something which looks like this figure. First of all, they got to create a project finance project company. Usually it is called SPV, special purpose vehicle company. This special purpose vehicle company usually is located somewhere in an offshore zone, because people do not want to pay high taxes in Germany or in France. This is going to be very, very difficult to repay, because projects such as these amount to billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars sometimes. Russia had problems with gas supplies to Europe since things started getting more harsh in the Ukraine. The Ukraine is a very difficult issue for in these bilateral negotiation processes. So until Kuchma was the president of the Ukraine, everything went a bit smooth, relatively smooth. Russia supplied gas through the territory of Ukraine. Ukraine did its best in complying to our rules, and we were actually happy about that. There were, of course, some conflicts, because the Ukraine always wanted some preferences and benefits, just like Belarus today wants some benefits and special prerogatives, special authority in this transit of oil through the territory of Belarus. That's why in 2010 they decided to build a new pipeline, because things started really getting out of hand, especially after 2004, because 2004 was the year of the Orange Revolution in the Ukraine. Yushchenko, Yanukovych tried to come to power in this country. Yushchenko was a pro-Western leader in the Ukraine. Yanukovych was called to be a pro-Russian leader, and mostly Eastern Ukraine voted for him, of course. Western Ukraine mostly voted for Yushchenko. There were very interesting things there. This is a very rare example of three-round presidential elections. So no country in the world ever had three-round presidential elections. In round two, in these presidential elections, Yanukovych won, and Yushchenko wanted to recount these elections, and they started a new election, round three. And in round 3, Yushchenko actually won these elections. The votes were recounted, and the Ukraine, that is, started looking more to the Western countries and wanted NATO to come to the Ukraine. So this is the point where the patience of the Russian government went to an end. And the highest point, the epicenter of this intergovernment conflict, was in 2007, when Russia just stopped supplying gas through the territory of Ukraine, and that was winter, January. Serbia, Bulgaria, who got Russian gas, started to freeze. Schools started to freeze, hospitals started to freeze. That was absolutely a nightmare for them. Of course, this is not a winter of Russian standards. Winter in Greece and Bulgaria, Serbia, is very mild, because this is the Balkans, and we live in times of global warming, so I don't think this is a very difficult problem for them in those days. But journalists and other politicians just wanted to speculate on it, and they wanted to make Russia sort of an enemy for all people. Well, there was a huge anti-Russian campaign in the West, and Russia and the Ukraine negotiated very, very long, and finally they agreed on a new price, and the gas supplies restarted. But at this point, Germany in particular, under German Chancellor Angela Merkel, decided that, well, there are people with very conventional thinking and very sensible people in Germany. He understood that as far as these gas supplies things are concerned, we have to do something, and they actually, and Russia, maybe that was a bilateral agreement, so they initiated this Nordstream project. And 2010 was the great year when this project was actually done. And this project was done just like what is shown here on this slide. They organized that sort of SPV, and they attracted many lenders, many sponsors. The governments of these countries were behind this project. They guaranteed it. There was this collateral, like I said before. And Gazprom owned 49% share in this project. The other 51% were shared between German banks and lenders. And also Sberbank participated in this project, and actually it was very successful. Dmitry Medvedev, then president of Russia, and Angela Merkel in 2011 put this Nord Stream 1 into operation, and that was a blue stream line. Blue stream because gas is considered to be a blue stream, although this is invisible, of course. This thing is invisible, this raw material. Today we're speaking about a Nord Stream 2 project because Germany again thought that Russia is, despite international sanctions, despite some controversies, despite Crimea crisis, despite many other things, there are business people and policy makers in Germany who understand very reasonably that they will not be able to cope without Russian gas, without supplies of Russian gas to their country. So that means they will have to construct more, to do more such projects, because they assessed these projects' performance, and usually project performance is measured using things such as these. They try to calculate return on existing assets, they try to understand the cost of new debt, return on new project, they compare those figures and come to the conclusion that this project is really very profitable, very easy to do, and it brings benefit to our economy. And Germany initiated Nordstream 2 as well, and Russia and Germany started this project once again. In a recent article of Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, they said about this project, this pipeline is almost complete, almost finished. They have to construct 160 kilometers of pipeline. This is very short distance, because they constructed already 2,400 kilometers. That means 2,400 kilometers. Now we're talking about these 160 kilometers. 160 kilometers, it's something like Moscow to all the way to Serebrяные Prudy. This is south to Moscow. Yeah, this is Moscow. This is still Moscow region, close to Tula. But to go to Tula, you got to make 300 kilometers in order to go to Tula. Right? So somewhere between Moscow and Tula, we got to build this pipeline. That's the distance. And the problem is that countries, some of the countries and some of the federal lands in Germany oppose these projects, because maybe you know, in some of the federal lands of Germany there are governments that do not support the central government, and there are coalition governments there. They may be ruled by Social Democrats plus the Greens and Liberal Democrats sometimes, or they may be ruled in coalition with Merkel's party. So political decisions are there very difficult. And these final 260 kilometers are very difficult to do. And now this Navalny situation, this poisoning, very controversial thing, which immediately sent prices on the Moscow Stock Exchange fluctuate, and this is the direct cause of the Russian ruble devaluation recently, and this 90 rubles a euro exchange rate. So there are a few factors affecting Russian ruble, and these factors include the price of oil, international sanctions, and new investment opportunities for Russian companies abroad. For example, as soon as Russia agrees to build some sort of facility somewhere in Iran, Iraq, or Syria, ruble strengthens. If oil prices drop like they did in March, they dropped to historic lows, actually into the negative. There was one day when oil futures cost something close to minus $40 a barrel. That was absolutely unthinkable even in the crisis of 2008 and 2010. That was a very dramatic fall down, and Russian ruble experienced a very difficult time as well. It again devalued. In January it cost 60 rubles a dollar, and in just a couple of weeks it devalued down to 75 rubles a dollar, and even 78 and 79 sometimes. The same goes for Russian ruble to the euro exchange rate. And now we again, so that was coronavirus factor, so to speak, because that was the direct cause of the coronavirus, the reason why oil prices dropped. But today we're speaking about a new wave of international sanctions against Russia, and they're affecting one of the greatest investment project finance deals in Russian history, and this is Nordstream 2. We were very expectant and very happy about it, because it promises new gas supplies, new profits from Europe, because Europe actually is a very good consumer. They consume lots of our resources, and they offer constant and stable profit returns. That means we may rely on this European partner, and without these partners we're going to suffer as well. Maybe there will be a new wave of economic crisis in Russia. Well, this is very unfortunate to say, that maybe even we will have to deal with 100 rubles the euro exchange rate. This is also possible, because markets are very sensitive to things such as these. If this project will be discontinued altogether, there will be really dramatic consequences if no solution is found out of this situation. The situation for Russia and for the Russian economy will be very difficult. Of course, we've got foreign currency reserves again running into record highs. Russia never had so much money in terms of foreign exchange reserves, something close to $500 billion recently. And we also got huge amounts of gold reserves. Russia is on the second place now in terms of gold holdings. We surpassed China in terms of gold holdings. China was accumulating gold reserves very recently, and it was it came as a surprise to some analysts and some economists that Russia increased its gold reserves so quickly. So there were also very clever people behind this economic policy in Russia, and they did not waste time and started investing more heavily, not in the US dollars, not in the euros, but in gold. And gold, like we know today, is almost $2,000 an ounce of gold, and it went down as far as $1,400 in March due to coronavirus, and that means it increased up to 2000. That means the dollar made something like 60,000 basis points. And at that price, Russia gained actually very much from those market operations. I think we do not know exactly the amount of money which we can actually replicate from those operations, but I think they're running into billions of dollars, and that was very, very clever. That person who was behind this idea at the central bank, maybe at the Ministry of Finance, so those people are very, very clever. Although it must be said that a recent policy of Russia to diversify into more euros in foreign exchange reserves was not a very good idea in economic terms, because euro deposits do not bring any profit to Russia. They actually lead to losses. We lose minus 0.35% annually on those deposits. That means euro deposits pay nothing. Dollar deposits pay something still today, even due to the fact that the US Federal Reserve lowered interest rates down to zero, and real interest rates went as far as negative in some countries. In the European Union and even in the United States, they're speaking now of negative exchange interest rates. So this is going to be a very, very difficult problem for Russia these days. We're going to deal with this economic crisis very recently. I don't think that this is a matter of very quick solution. We will have to fight for this, and we will have to fight to prove that Navalny was not poisoned by or precipitated by the Russian government, especially. I think there will be maybe even lawsuits at the International Court of Justice, the European Court of Justice. There will be very harsh processes in expectancy for us. And this is a new opportunity for Russian enemies abroad to do something against our investment projects. Maybe at this point we got to better cooperate with Eastern countries such as China. Maybe we got to do a closer cooperation with China with this One Belt, One Road initiative, because in the end this project involves Russia as well. Railroads and other communication networks planned by One Road, One Belt initiative actually will go through Russia as well. Russia is going to be a transit country between China and the EU. Today, in order to go from China to Europe with goods, for example, Acer computers from China, or Apple computers, Apple smartphones, to go from China to Europe, it takes a couple of months, a month and a half, sometimes even 2 months. That means you will have to go from a China seaport somewhere on the eastern coast of China. You will have to go down to South China Sea, all the way to Suez Canal, and to the Mediterranean, and somewhere France or Amsterdam. So it takes actually sometimes months, and in times of global lockdowns due to coronavirus and things such as these, it takes even longer. But to go from China to the EU through Russia, using it as a transit country, it will take just half a month, and sometimes even 10 to 12 days to go from China to the EU. They will use high-speed railways. They will build them in the years to come, and this railroad will go through Western China, Kazakhstan, Russia, Belarus, Poland. Well, this is the EU. There they will decide where it will go, this railroad. In particular, of course, this is going to be a very great project. If it's accomplished, that will be a very great opportunity for China to communicate better with Europe. However, nothing comes without a price. Again, railroad shipments cost sometimes half as much as sea maritime shipments, because a container ship may take hundreds of those containers, and one tray can take only a couple of dozens of these containers, maybe 20 or 30 containers. This is just one train, but a great oceanic container ship may take hundreds of containers. That means the cost of transporting China's goods via sea and maritime routes is very, very cheap, and sometimes it amounts to nothing for Chinese products to be transported to the EU. Actually, I do not understand this China's idea. Why do you have to construct a new railroad? Yes, it will take less time to go from China to Europe, but this is all those bureaucratic procedures you will have to face in Russia, in Kazakhstan, in Belarus. It will certainly come not without a price. They will have to pay bribes, they will have to pay taxes, they will have to pay some sort of payments to the Russian government, to Kazakhstan government. They will demand more because these countries are very, very they do not have production capacities such as China has, and that means they will understand that they may live on those railroad transit from China to Europe, and they will take great advantage of that. Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus will take huge amounts of money. Via sea, you pay only to Egypt. In order to go through the Suez Canal, you got to pay $1 million for one ship, and that's all. And then you go through Suez Canal to Europe, and you sell your goods. You upload them somewhere in Amsterdam or Rotterdam, Hamburg, or in some Italian port, Naples, in France, somewhere maybe. So it will take less effort, it will take less money to pay, because European seaports are less corrupt. Customs officers there are less corrupt than in Russia or Kazakhstan especially. And I think so what is the reason then to construct this railroad in terms of this One Belt One Road initiative? Maybe again Chinese are very, very interesting and very dark thinking people. They're very, very this is a very thin issue, like Comrade Sukhov said in a very famous movie, The White Sun of the Desert. Yeah, he used to say there that the East is a very, very fine issue, very, very difficult thing to understand. You never understand what they think there in Asia. It's very difficult to understand what those people want. Maybe part of this idea to create this railroad is just to keep people closer, Chinese people, in order to unite this great country, to make it closer together, in order to make out of it a sort of an empire. It's just like the idea of Sergei Witte when he wanted to create, to construct Trans-Siberian railway line in the end of the 19th century. It united Russian Empire, and it started the economic miracle in Russia in the early 20th century, when industrial production in Russia was really, really the highest actually in the world, compared to countries such as the US or Germany. That was a time of great economic opportunities, and that was also a very great investment project of Russia, project finance deals of the 19th century, one of the largest historically important project. The railroad construction in those days, in the early 20th and late 19th centuries, was the highest in Russia. This pace of construction. Each year we constructed 5,000 kilometers of railroads. This is absolutely historic record in those days. The United States even did less. Rockefeller could not manage that, although he is also behind some of the greatest railway projects in the United States, because he wanted to deliver his oil from Texas to New York to Chicago to other greatest industrial cities in the US. So he was very, very eager to do that. So from a historic perspective, like we know, and like what you can see here on this slide, investment projects were very, very important also in the past. I think we may have a break. Yeah?